All right, so for today's video, you saw the title, you saw the thumbnail, right? I'm going to talk about why I think Joe Rogan is controlled opposition, right? And I'll start off with this, right? The system, right? The system that we live in, the system doesn't let people get famous, get commercially successful, get mainstream, right? When I say mainstream, I mean that they're propped up by the mainstream. They're propped up by, the media outlets. They're propped up by the algorithms on social media. They don't let people get that way. They don't let people stay that way, right? Stay number one podcast in the world, right? With the amount of people that he has access to, the powerful people that Joe Rogan has access to. They don't let people get like that and stay like that unless there is a control system put into place to control what that person says, right? And this is something that I've talked about in previous videos where basically, if you want to identify controlled opposition, if you want to identify someone who is an agent of the system, right? If you think about Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, people who are like the podcast people, right? If you want to identify, right, if they're agents of the system, one of the red flags, right? And this is the same thing for new age gurus. This is the same thing for internet celebrities and stuff like that. Is that they're too popular, right? They're too famous, right? If anyone is a threat to the system, they don't let people get that popular, get that successful, get that much money, right? If they're a threat to the system. And one of the things that you can look into to sort of see it, to sort of spot the difference, right? What's the difference between controlled opposition and real opposition, right? You look at Bill Cooper versus Alex Jones, right? Alex Jones, he gets to he gets notoriety. I don't think he's famous in the traditional sense, but he gets notoriety. He gets his own studio. He gets all this money, right? And he stays that way for a long time, and he gets to be on Joe Rogan and all this stuff. But then you look at Bill Cooper, right? He gets shot in front of the house. He gets shot in front of his house, right? Think about Alex Jones versus like David Icke, for example, right? You can have Joe Rogan. He brings people like Eddie Bravo, and Alex Jones, and they talk about all the crazy stuff that they talk about, right? And they could talk about machine elves and DMT and aliens and all this other stuff, but lizard people, that's too crazy. That's too crazy. It's kind of suspicious to me, right? And then you look at yet again like the people that he has access to, the powerful people that Joe Rogan has access to. You look at like people like he'll interview people like Trump, like Musk, like Peter Thiel, right, who are involved in this new world order agenda to enslave humanity, and not a peep from Joe Rogan, right? About if you think about like with Trump specifically, not a peep about him about Jeffrey Epstein, right? Not a peep about him when he's interviewing Musk. Not a peep about him about the brain chips, right? And even when he talks about the brain chips, right? I mean, it's very obvious that the brain chips hooking people's brains up to AI, right? That's a very obvious part of the agenda. And you can look at old podcasts of Joe Rogan, and you can see that he actively promotes the whole brain chip agenda. It's like, oh man, we're all gonna have chips in the brain, and it's gonna be a very bad day for people who want to lie, for people who, because we're gonna be able to see everyone's thought. He is involved with this agenda, and he's been involved from the early stages, right? So Joe Rogan, yet again, like I said at the beginning of the video, right? They don't let people get famous, get successful, stay successful in a mainstream sense. They don't let people get that way and stay that way for as long as he has, unless there's a control system put into place, right? He'll talk about machine elves and DMT and flat Earth and like the gray aliens. He'll talk about UFOs all day long, but what he won't talk about. He won't talk about the tunnels underneath the synagogues and the bloodstained mattresses in New York. He won't talk about that. He won't talk about he won't talk about the Draco reptilians. He won't talk about like there's this one clip, and this is the one clip that I saw that made me start questioning Joe Rogan, right? There's this one clip, and I might put it at the beginning of the video. I don't know if I will or not, but I might put it at the beginning of the video where and if not, like I'll link it in the description. It's this clip of him and Eddie Bravo, and Eddie Bravo is talking about Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell's quote unquote suicides, and he's talked about how he was starting to talk about like the whole conspiracy around it, because there were all these musicians they were making a documentary on child trafficking. It's called The Silent Children, right? And they were all making a documentary about that, and they all quote unquote committed suicide at the same time. And it's the same thing with like Avicii, right? Avicii, Chester Bennington, Chris Cornell, like a bunch of other people were making a documentary about child trafficking, and they all quote unquote commit suicide all at the same time. And speaking of Avicii, right? He has I think it's For a Better Day, right? The music video talks about like the trafficking done by the elites, right? So going back to what I'm talking about, like the clip has Eddie Bravo. He started to talk about this. He's like Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington. They had a foundation. They were all, and Joe Rogan's like, let's not talk about this. He's smoking his cigar. Or like, here, I have this pen. He's smoking his cigar. He's like, let's not talk about this. Let's not. He's all hunched over. He's avoiding eye contact with Eddie Bravo. He's like, let's not. I don't want to get in trouble, man. Let's not talk about that, right? The utter cowardice of him, that his money, that his image is more important than talking about real conspiracies, than real information. All of the stuff that he talks about is a nothing burger. All of the, like 99% of the conspiracies that he talks about, that he touches on his podcast, nothing burgers. They don't mean anything. It's because as soon as you talk about something like that, like Eddie Bravo brought up, to him, he's like, let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about, like, the utter cowardice of someone like that. And yet again, right? They don't let people get that famous, and they don't let people stay that famous unless there are control systems put into place. So I definitely believe that there are certain people that and it's very obvious. You can tell that like there are certain people that he avoids mentioning. He avoids like even knowing that they exist. Right? David Icke is one example. I think like Sam Hyde is another example of like someone that like Joe Rogan just refuses to acknowledge that they exist, or like refuses to like let onto the podcast. I mean, think about it. Like it sort of makes sense, for whatever your beliefs about David Icke, right? I mean, it sort of makes sense for Joe Rogan to bring him onto the podcast. I mean, he's the lizard people guy. I mean, he is the lizard people guy. Like, why would you not bring someone like that on the podcast? I mean, if you brought Alex Jones on the podcast, why not bring him on the podcast? But like that never happens, because I definitely believe that there are control systems put into place to the point where he won't like there's certain people that maybe he has handlers, maybe he's afraid of losing his money, so he's not going to touch certain topics, certain people, right? Like there are certain people that he won't bring into his podcast. There are certain subjects that if people bring them up, he trusts to shut them down real quick, just like he did in that clip. And yet again, I'll link it in the description. I think I'll put it in the beginning of the video. If it gets copyrighted, then I'll just upload just me talking in front of the camera. But yet again, like if anyone starts talking about any real information, right? Then like, what does he do? Like, let's not talk about it. Let's change the subject, right? And so there are a lot of red flags, and like on top of that, you look at all his corporate sponsors. You look at like yet again, like, he has way too many corporate sponsors. He's way too popular. He has way too much access to powerful people that are involved in this new world order, involved in this cabal of people, right? He has access to way too many of those people, and he's way too commercially, and he stayed that way for way too long for him not to be controlled opposition. It's easier. I think it would be harder to find reasons why he's not controlled opposition than to find reasons why he is. Right? I think it would be more difficult to try to say, okay, how is Joe Rogan not controlled opposition? It'd be harder because yet again, I mean, and if you think about it this way, right? This is another thing that I'm thinking of. It's you look at like Project Mockingbird, right? You look at how the CIA has assets in all the mainstream. I'm just making sure my microphone's on. Okay, so like the CIA has assets in all of the mainstream media outlets, right? You could look it up. You could look up Project Mockingbird, right? That they have assets in all the mainstream media outlets. Like every meaningful media outlet is controlled and run and operated by the CIA, right? And so if you look at Project Mockingbird 2.0, right? If think about like one point, like the initial Project Mockingbird is they control the people that get on the radios, they control the people that get onto the television, right? Project Mockingbird 2.0, internet personalities, social media companies, right? Controlling the tech corporations, right? Controlling the algorithms. Yet again, the first, so like the sort of like the first iteration of Project Mockingbird is all about like controlling the airwaves, controlling the television, controlling the radio, right? But the second, like Project Mockingbird 2.0, right? 2.0, right, is controlling internet personalities, right? Yet again, putting CIA assets or Mossad assets, right? I don't know how you say Mossad. I think, right, like, because when I think Mossad, I think, yes, the CIA is essentially Mossad under a different name, right? And so it makes sense that, like, okay, with the internet coming up, right, that the control system would put assets into place on the internet, because that's like the new television, right? So people like Joe Rogan, people like Lex Friedman, people, I even think that like popular streamers, like, I think that like I Show Speed, Kai Senat, right, people like that, I think that like this, uh, at least a larger percentage than you think are controlled by the system, or they're propped up by the system. And yet again, I mean, it's just a red flag. Like every time I look at Joe Rogan, it's just a red flag. Right, way too popular, way too successful, and he's been that way for way too long. Or you look at how like the social media algorithms, yeah, and this goes again to how the control system controls the tech companies now. In the same way that they controlled the airwaves back in the day, they now control the tech companies, right? And you look at how the algorithm favors certain people and punishes certain other people, right? And you look at how people like Joe Rogan, people like Lex Friedman, right, how they're propped up by the system, and not just by like the media, not just by like the media, like by famous people. I'm talking about like the algorithm itself, the algorithm that determines whether or not you get heard, right, is controlled by the system, right? And so I think that people like Joe Rogan, people like Lex Friedman, people who are like the popular podcast people, and this is the same thing with actors, the same things with actresses, the same thing with like they don't let people get into influential positions unless there are controls put into place to make sure that they don't say certain that they don't get into certain topics, that they don't bring attention to certain people that are actually real opposition, right? And to sum it up, I think that that's the basic sort of synopsis of like why I think Joe Rogan is controlled opposition, because yet he's way too popular, he's way too commercially successful, he's involved in way too many of these agendas, or way too many of the people that are a part of the agenda to enslave humanity, right? He's buddy buddy with Elon Musk, the guy that wants to put chips into your brain. Yeah, that guy's like his best friend or something. Like he's buddy buddy with him. Like he'll smoke a blunt and he'll give softball interviews to people like Peter Thiel, people like Elon Musk, people like Donald Trump, right? And for all the people, right, that going into, oh, you're a leftist, like I'm not a leftist, right? Right wing left, like, you have like Joe Biden stiffing little girls' hair, right? And then you have Jeffrey Donald Trump, being on the Lolita Express, being with Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, so left wing, right wing, two wings of the same bird. Okay, right, and yet again, Joe Rogan, he promotes the whole puppet show. He's a part of the puppet show, right? And another thing too, and this is where we get into like gut feeling, right? Like I have like a certain gut feeling about Joe Rogan, right? Because like he strikes me as kind of a slime ball, right? Because because what he is, right, in a single word, right? He is a lukewarm. He's just a guy. He doesn't really have an opinion on anything. Right? It's like you can have your opinion, I can have my opinion, and we can all be friends. And I respect it. I respect everyone's beliefs. Right? People who don't stand for anything. Right? And Joe Rogan, he reminds me of like these two quotes. Right? A friend to everyone is a friend to no one. A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. Right? That's Joe Rogan in a nutshell. Right? And I think that this is besides him being placed there by the system, or him being controlled by the system, right? On top of that, like one of the reasons why I think that he's so popular, he's so famous, is because he appeals to the lowest common denominator, right? His every one of his opinions is basically like it's like a mathematical approximation of what everyone else believes, right? And he doesn't say anything too controversial. He doesn't say anything to and yet again, like it's the sort of slime ball sort of energy, right? That you can pick this up on certain people that you see in your daily life, right? Like the people who like they don't really have an opinion on anything. They don't really have the people who don't really stand for anything. Watch out for those people, right? Watch out, because those people will turn on you at a moment's notice. These are the types of people that like if you pointed a gun to their head, there's nothing they won't do. They'll do the most evil, depraved things if you point a gun to their head and tell them to do X, Y, Z. right? Because they don't stand for anything. They don't have a hill to die on. They don't stand for anything, right? And Joe Rogan, he's one of those people where he you can just pick up on the energy of him as a person. Like he is a lukewarm, doesn't stand for anything. He's friends with everyone, right? He's friends with everyone. He agrees with everyone's beliefs, right? It's almost like an NPC sort of energy, right? And those are the types of people that piss me off. Like the people who are like, oh, they're harmless and they're just a guy and they really don't have an opinion on anything. Right? But I respect your beliefs and your beliefs can be your and like and they agree with everything that everyone else agrees with. Right? Like they're like right in the middle of the fucking bell curve. Right? Like those types of people piss me off because they don't have principles. No principles. Yet again, when it comes to the important topics, not a peep from him. Right. He won't stand up and actually ask real questions. He won't look into real conspiracies because it would hurt his image, because it would hurt his money. Right. And that pisses me off. You know. I'm trying to think of like what else I wanted to say because I was thinking about this in the shower. I was thinking like about all these points. But yeah, I mean, like Joe Rogan, he yet again way too popular, way too mainstream, and he stayed that way for way too long for him not to be controlled opposition, right? He's in bed, so to speak, with way too many powerful people. He has access to way too many of these people that are in this cabal, in this new world order, like the people who are a part of that agenda. He has access to those people that no one else has access to, and he doesn't not a peep from him. He'll give them softball interviews and he won't ask any real questions about that affect the common man because he sold his soul for money, right? So I definitely think that he's controlled opposition, and yet again I'll link to like the clips, below, right? Or like that one clip that sort of led me down this sort of path, or the sort of path of questioning him, right? And let that clip of like a Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo. I think I'll link it in the description. I don't think I'll put it at the beginning of the video, but yeah, I mean, and yet again, I'll end the video the same way that I began the video, right? They don't let people get popular, get mainstream, get commercially successful, and they don't let people stay that way unless there's a control system put into place, right? Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, all these internet celebrities that are propped up by the algorithm, that's Project Mockingbird 2.0. So don't fall for it. Right? Don't fall for these controlled opposition lukewarms. All right? That's the video.